This tutorial will show a special way of using luminosity selections. Tony Kuiper calls it detailing the darks. So let's go to the software you're in, whether it's Elements or a full version of Photoshop, and go File, Open. And when you open that, you're going to find the folder I've provided called Detailing the Darks. And in it, there is the test image. So if you'll open that Detailed Darks Canyon image, this is the sample image that we're going to use in order to do the experiment we're going to do here. Before we start, we need to use a luminosity selection for picking out or isolating the darks away from the rest of the image. And so the recommendation he has given is that we go to the action panel where we have Tony Kuiper's actions. You go to the section that is called TK Selections. We're not going to get another layer from this, but we are going to choose the selection that will pick up and focus on the darks of the image. And he has recommended that you use Darks 1. That will catch all of the darks that are of middle tone grayscale or darker. So it's going to work on most of them. If you ever had an image where you only wanted to work on the extreme dark part of the image, you would choose one of his selections that are higher numbered, which begins to select the darker part of the image. For this one, we're going to choose Darks 1, and be sure you're in the TK Selections folder. If so, play the selection onto the screen, and it will pick up the part of the image that is focusing on the darks. Reminder, if you haven't heard this before, the crawling ants you see for his selections are simply the part of the image that's at least 50% selected. He has done a wonderful job of blending his selections into the rest of the image. So there won't be an abrupt change from what is selected to what isn't, but what you get to see in the crawling ants is the part of the image that is largely selected. And then the effect will be blended into the rest of the image. So while you have that there, we're going to open an adjustment layer for levels. He says you can use levels or curves. The reason is we're not going to use the adjustment layer except to provide us with a mask. So come down, I'm opening levels, and you'll see that when it opens, it has that selection still in effect. So now I want another identical layer. So I go up to a layer, duplicate layer, say OK. So we have two layers that both have the Darks 1 selection applied to them. If you're somewhat new to this, if you take a look and want to see what one of those masks looks like, if you point to it and hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the mask, it'll replace the image. And where it's lightest on the mask is where the greatest effect will take place. Where it's the darkest is where the least effect will take place. And as you can see, the darkest area is around the sunset, that brighter part. So when we make changes here, we are not going to be affecting those bright sunset colors. To go back to the image, you just repeat the Alt or Option click on the mask, and you get your picture back. We do that quite often when we want to see what this specific mask actually looks like, where it's dark, where it's light, and how it's going to affect the adjustment. So once we have that, we're ready to change the names of these layers. The lower one, which is called Levels 1 for me, if I double click on the name so it's highlighted, I'm going to name it Multiply. And this means I'm going to apply a blend mode to that layer, which is called Multiply. This helps me to remember which is which. Go to the upper level, double click on that name, and change it to Screen. And enter that. Now you have a reminder of what you want to do to those blend modes. Come back to the bottom that says Multiply, select the layer, and at the top of the Layers panel, you will find the word Normal. That's the normal blend mode, which comes up whenever you start any adjustment layer. We're going to pop it open, And in the upper group here are all the choices that will darken an image. And our directions tell us to choose the word multiply. Of course, it immediately darkens the image. Come up to the word screen and do the same thing. Go to the normal pop-up menu. And in the second group, we have the blend modes that lighten the adjustment. So choose the word screen. Okay. And you have now applied two effects to the darkest parts of the image. You have applied a multiply layer, and on top of that, you've taken those pixels and also allowed some brightness to come through. So it's a blend of darkening and lightening those to give them a more pronounced appearance. If you go and come to the bottom of that layers panel where the background image shows, if we hold the Alt option and click on that eyeball, you will hide all the adjustments we just made. And you'll see the original image, and then click the eyeball again, and you'll see what we've done to intensify the beautiful darks in that image. Now, in the original directions from Tony Kuiper, he recommends that you put these two layers in a group and then adjust the opacity. I've come to the conclusion that we get a more interesting control if we keep them independent and then change the opacity on each layer separately. So I want you to see what happens if you have the multiply layer is the one you're working on. If you go to the opacity slider at the top of the layers panel, this is a sticky slider, meaning if you grab the word opacity and drag it to the left, it'll lower the opacity, and you'll see it reduces the darkening effect on that. So if you had an image and you felt that the darkening was too strong, you could reduce that. You can now go up to the screen mode and do the same thing. When you lower this one, you lose the brightness, and it'll take it back down before you applied the screen mode. And so each image may be slightly different on how you want to go. So remember that when you've done this, you can go back and adjust the opacity on either layer to get the effect you like the most. And we can just leave it. But I know that if I think that I want to heighten the darks more, I can go and go to the multiply layer and reduce the opacity. If I want to lighten the darks, I can reduce the opacity. But if I like the darkness and I want to cut back on the amount of screen that I've used, I can lower this. And when I lower that, I lose this lightening effect. So you see how much control this gives you to get what you like. And of course, it's always important to remember the computer we're working on should be well calibrated so that what you see here finally is what will appear if you either print this or have it projected. That you want to be sure your screen that you're working on hasn't been souped up like kids like to do for video games. If the brightness of the screen is high, you will get an effect that will not be the same as the effect that's embedded in the file. What you do here is embedded in the file when we save this. But if you go and play around with the brightness of your screen, none of that information comes together in the file name. So be sure you have an average brightness in your screen. And then once we have done this, we can go ahead and save this image, and you will be able to have this new version of the original image.